Good quality service and timelessness is always on trend. Like, I think you can overcomplicate it. At its core, the honesty of an experience is the thing that is the most important to keep sight of. We just started doing self-check-in at High Country Motor Lodge. We have 4 self-check-in kiosks, and we have 1 front desk person who is called a guide. That person is just there to talk with you about the experiences that are available to you on property. They're not there to talk to you about how was your drive, what are you doing, and all the time filler that's required for the front desk agent to just fill the awkward spaces between handing over the credit card and checking you in. Like, that's not a value-add hospitality experience.
So, John Grossman here with you. Excited to be having this conversation today. And one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you is because you have a hospitality portfolio that is the envy of many hospitality owners throughout the country, including myself. The style is just so good. And I think a good place to start is maybe just to give some of the listeners a little bit about your background.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I appreciate the intro, and thanks for the kudos on the portfolio. It's definitely something we've been building over the last 10 years or so, but our focus is primarily in the Mountain West, Intermountain, kind of West, Southwest region, along with the California coast right now. So we have 9 hotels total in the portfolio. That's about 1,350 rooms. And then we have a new standalone restaurant, which will eventually become a hotel once we get through the entitlement process. All of the hotels in the portfolio are independent. We're not affiliated with any brand or franchise agreements. We've got all the infrastructure in-house, sales, marketing, operational leadership. And it allows us to be pretty nimble, pretty flexible, especially when you go through difficult times like we had most recently with the pandemic, of course. And it allows us to be a little bit more I guess scrappy, if you will, in terms of competition landscape and other things that we're all up against as independent hotel owners and operators. So our hotel portfolio has 2 hotels in Carmel by the Sea, 2 in Laguna Beach, 2 in the Phoenix area, a new one up in Flagstaff, and then 2 properties in Boise, Idaho as well, along with the restaurant that I mentioned, which is actually in Paradise Valley. So that's what the landscape is like today. And, our focus right now is really to maintain a geographic concentration. The purpose for that is really twofold. First and foremost, we think it's the quickest and most efficient path to value creation, because we can have our eyes and bodies on the properties as much as possible. And so we have a mandate to have a direct flight or 1 flight connection from Phoenix, Arizona, which is where our team is based. And then the second reason is quality of life. So I'm on the road a lot. My team's on the road a lot. But, the goal is to get out there to the properties and back and hopefully do a day trip if we can, or a simple overnight. And so that's really where we landed in terms of keeping our geographic focus to the West and Intermountain West.
Quality of life seems to be synonymous with the West Coast. And you're not the only one, because what happened since COVID is just this really interesting explosion of leisure travel. And it seemed like you were at the forefront of that. So what about leisure and what about independent hotels is so interesting to you?
Yeah, I think, we kind of got lucky in terms of the pandemic and all of the demand drivers that it led to. And I say that because we focused on markets that allowed us to have an independent presence. And, when you find yourself to those opportunities, they really lend themselves to being markets where you're selling the market, right? So Carmel by the Sea is a place that you select, and then we just fight for your eyeballs as you go on your search path and descend where you want to go. And so it allows us to be kind of in niche markets where we can have an outsized presence. And then on the flip side, our major footprint is in Phoenix, Arizona, where it's a lot of group business. So we've kind of got the dichotomy between, heavy leisure on the smaller boutique side, and then heavy group on the larger big boxes that we have. So it's just, kind of opportunistic view on things. And fortunately enough, it'll let us be in a good position to weather the storm that we just went through. I think all of us were cringing as we went into the pandemic. And then we were very, very pleased to see that the markets that we're in really lent themselves to strong leisure demand, which absolutely floated the boat, so to speak, through the pandemic, and then allowed a real strong snapback as we came back with a lot of the revenge travel and revenge weddings, and I mean other kind of silly terminologies, but they're true, and they were really welcomed phenomenon for us.
So how did you avoid in your history of your company the franchising model? And how did you have the confidence to just do it yourself on the independent side? Because a lot of people are nervous about it. They're saying, well, I'm not going to be able to get financing, or I'm not going to be able to get the eyeballs. So what gave you the confidence to go out and do that? Is it just the location, or is there something else?
Well, as you know, a bit of the history in our company, you're aware, of course, is that it's a family business. So I'm a second generation leader of the business. Um, and I bring that up to say that we had the credibility and the longstanding track record to allow us to get the financing on an independent basis. And I think that ends up being a major hurdle for a lot of independent operators. And that's why you see the proliferation of soft brands. And it makes a lot of sense, right? If you don't have a track record, you need that marketing engine behind you in order to get the confidence from the lending partners that you need, construction and otherwise, to move forward with these projects. So that was one hurdle that, fortunately for us, was a little bit easier to clear. And then, the other issue, of course, is the chicken or egg scenario with regards to the infrastructure that's required to support an operation like this. And in that case as well, we had the infrastructure, we had enough scale to amortize those costs, and then we could layer on within various independent opportunities thereafter. But without the infrastructure, it's really hard to get going, and that ends up being a major hurdle as well.
And when you say infrastructure, what do you actually mean by that?
So we have a centralized reservation system with a team in Phoenix. We have a decentralized sales force in 12 cities across the nation. And those two components by themselves are major infrastructure pieces. And then we have a really great pedigree of operational leaders that have come from independent-like experiences, of course, Ritz Carlton and Four Seasons. I say independent-like in terms of the quality that they provide, the attention to detail, and a lot of things that lend themselves really well to independent operators, and just kind of a DNA that allows our team to thrive, of course, because they're thinking creatively, and then giving them the flexibility to go beyond what's mandated by a lot of the brand standards.
That's interesting. So what about those people makes them a good fit for your company, having been at a Ritz Carlton, a Four Seasons, maybe there's a Hilton in there? And what have you learned from them? And consequently, what are you teaching them the way of the wise independent one?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's actually kind of a pull scenario for them, right? I think they were entrepreneurs in spirit, and they came up through a pedigree where they, an institutional framework that allowed them to understand the business and understand the attention to detail that's required to provide great service. But they weren't satisfied, I don't think, in the roles that they were in. And so you kind of get this certain percentage of folks that want to be more, I don't want to say more creative, because these other companies are incredibly creative, but a bit more aggressive, a little bit more tenacious, a little bit more eager to kind of bite off problems themselves and solve them independently. And, we open the door for them. They walk right through it. And the folks that have stayed with us really thrive in that environment. And again, because the pandemic's so fresh in mind, it allowed us to be incredibly nimble and overcome tremendous adversity, because they were positioned to have that perspective and outlook and kind of tenacious spirit. And it's just part of the DNA that they have. And then, of course, it propagates itself within the organization. Their internal idea sharing, problem solving, problem making, and overcoming is just sort of this, refreshing exciting framework for them to thrive within.
You mentioned location a couple times. I always stress to my team that it's not always that complicated. It's location, location, location. Do you have almost like a filter or a criteria that you look for when you're investing? I know you said you want to be in the Intermountain West or the West Coast, but once you get there on the map, what are you looking for?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've found ourselves kind of having three silos of business at the moment, and we're open to more. But on the ultra kind of high barrier to entry, leisure focused markets, you have places in California like Carmel by the Sea, which actually has a hotel moratorium. So there's already a built-in barrier to entry. And then you have Laguna Beach, which has a de facto moratorium on rooms vis-a-vis the California Coastal Commission and the entitlement process. It's incredibly difficult. And so when you look at some of those markets, they're just iconic locations that have a brand value that is just incredible to leverage. And to get in is hard, to thrive is difficult. But in those markets in particular, the long term private equity value creation model is really accretive for us. And so we can be patient. We can say that we have a longer return horizon, and that's okay because we believe in the long term value that those brands provide. And so if you look at the up and down the coast, we're focused on places, of course, like Santa Barbara, La Jolla, Encinitas, up in the Central Coast, of course, as well, even into the Bay Area, but in the smaller niche markets that really have the brand value established already. And then on the group side, as I mentioned, it's just the high beta markets. Phoenix is a perfect market for us. We always talk about Phoenix being like a snake crawling up a hill, right? It dips and it boosts and dips and boosts, but it's always in a very upward trajectory. And that's, benefited, of course, by a tremendous demographic profile, which has only been boosted even further by the pandemic. And then the third branch of business that we've just dipped our toe into is kind of this, it's definitely inspired by the graduate model, but layering on kind of the Intermountain West, disbursement of in-migration. So Boise, Idaho's tremendous beneficiary that absolutely fit in that category. We just went into Flagstaff. We've got our eyes, of course, in markets in Montana like Bozeman and Missoula. So they're places that have, sizable population to begin with, then a university, and then some ancillary drivers, whether it be a national park or recreational opportunities, access to nature and beauty. So Bend, Chico, Missoula, Bozeman, Eugene, places like that you can kind of see your way through to layering on a really nice leisure experience and then tapping into some of the demand drivers as well as some of the group opportunities that are afforded in markets like, for example, Flagstaff is a Western regional headquarters for Gore Technologies. It has NAU. It has a major USGS presence. And then you have 2.5 million visitors a year passing through Flagstaff to get to the Grand Canyon. And we were the first, design forward boutique hotel to enter the market. And so far, so good. So we just seeing those opportunities and that particular brand we'd like to roll out in some of those, Mountain West target towns that I mentioned.
I want to come back to that because that one is just so applicable for a lot of folks and a lot of listeners because it seems very attainable. The location might not be attainable for everyone, but what you did seems like, yeah, maybe I could do that, but no one can really do that. It's really hard. So when you're in these locations like Santa Barbara, Carmel, are you just overpaying for this stuff? Are you getting in with some brokers? How are you finding these things in a place where there's a moratorium on hotel rooms, or by legislation you effectively can't build a hotel room? What is the secret there?
Just patience. Sure, we'll have to overpay, or there'll be a moment in time where it feels like you're overpaying. but most of all, it's patience, and we just know that we aren't going to hit many. The ones we hit will be highly scrutinized. This uh, you really difficult to access off market opportunity stuff, and really never comes to pass, right? I think those are just like super rare, and they occupy you know outsized headspace in people's minds, but I just don't think they happen that often. People are too sophisticated. Even the mom and pops that have had it in their family for 2 or 3 generations, you know, they're hiring first-rate brokers and going through a normal process as far as we have experienced. And so, in those markets, once we're able to plant a flag of size, of scale. So in Laguna, our first hotel was 70 rooms. Our second hotel was 36 rooms, and our third hotel could be 12 or 20 rooms. And that's because we're able to have the infrastructure. We can, afford a really high quality GM who can then be an area GM very quickly, and we can run, multiple hotels as if they're one hotel, because the markets are so small and the geographies of those hotels is so proximate to each other that they can easily be serviced by a great high quality team. But for us at least, and this is not rocket science, of course, getting in with scale is the most important litmus test for these markets. So if we were to go into Santa Barbara or into La Jolla, we'd have to enter the market with something that had enough scale or high enough RevPAR to afford a really high quality GM.
Okay, so does
and then we
that
could
mean
layer, yeah.
so does that mean then that you're not going in and buying a 30-room hotel as your first investment in a new market, that you really have to start with, let's say, 70 plus, and then maybe you're layering in on top of that with smaller hotels as they become available?
Exactly. Or it might be a small portfolio buy. So maybe in Santa Barbara, there's 2 hotels of 30 or 40 rooms each, and you buy them both at the same time. Doesn't happen very frequently, but absolutely, we need to go into the market with something of consequence. And then we can back ourselves into smaller opportunities. And so in Flagstaff, we've got our eye on 2 hotels in particular that we would never be able to buy as an entree into the market. But now that we've got the infrastructure with a 125 room hotel, it's in our scope, and we can maybe overpay a little bit, right? And we can find our way to that opportunity that is not necessarily economic for other folks to come in for an opening foray.
And when you go into a market like that, where you start to maybe see a vision of a cluster, is each hotel going to be a little bit different, or are they just going to be more of the same of what the original is? Like, are you going to do maybe a more outdoor focused budget version? Are you going to do more of a luxe version? Or are you going to do more of a hostel version? Or are they all just the same?
Yeah, I think the buildings tell you what they need to be. And so in Flagstaff, for example, we have this 1962 Howard Johnson, which is very much lending itself to this idea of the High Country Motor Lodge, which is the brand that we created. And if we find other buildings like that, then we can apply that brand. Now, in Flagstaff, again, there's a couple of hotel opportunities. One would be a true kind of small scale mom and pop motor lodge, which we could layer on some nice design and make it feel really bespoke and intimate. And the other one's kind of an older, smaller room typology building, which might have a combination of some hostel-like rooms and some more traditional hotel rooms. And, I think that market itself is relatively low rated. So there's not going to be a huge spread in the opportunity to kind of slice the profile of those experiences. But they'll be different enough, and we'll kind of lean into the building in ways that feel really, appropriate and germane to kind of the sense of what we think should be there. I think that's, as a general comment, one of our company mantras is "Don't fight the building." And so what we mean by that is look at the bones, understand the bones. If it's the right opportunity, then lean into what's there, as opposed to being additive. We try to peel everything back to what we believe the essence of that experience should have been or always wanted to be. So we talk about not fighting the building, and then we talk about the concept of telling the lie that tells the truth. And so what I mean by that is what is the true essence of this experience, and how is it that we can build a white lie around it to lead you to feel a certain way about what you think might have always been there, but that has newly arrived vis-a-vis our design overlay and conceptual pillars, but really trying to find what the essence of the place and the space always wanted to be. And that's really where we start with any of our opportunities.
All right. So I really want you to break down the underwriting side of your analysis on this Flagstaff deal. How do you have conviction to do a deal like this in a new market? Break it down.
Yeah. So this, as I mentioned earlier, the Flagstaff market is a relatively low-rated market, but a very high occupancy market, and that's to do with the demand drivers that we mentioned: Grand Canyon, NAU, Gore Technologies. Good old-fashioned road tripping has always been strong on Route 66, of course, as well. And in this case, the hotel that we unearthed had great physical attributes, large footprint, lots of open space to utilize and reconceptualize. But at the end of the day, I mean, it was nearly falling down. Older vintage building, hadn't been looked after super well, and as a result, was doing about $40 ADR, but at very high occupancy. It was around 92% at the time. And we said, look, we can recreate this experience in a way that is nostalgic, that is resonant, that meets the desires of a lot of the leisure travelers now that they're hitting the road and that are rediscovering the West. And in doing so, we were able to home in on a couple of the market leaders, and we were seeing that the ADR that the top tier of the properties in market were doing was actually about $120 a night ADR. And so, big gap for us to go from $40 to $120. But that was the opportunity before us, and that was the risk that we took. And so the benefit of taking such a low-rated property with so many difficulties to a higher rate, of course, was we were able to buy it very well. And so the investment in the property was more than double the original cost. So our renovation budget was around 110 or 15% of the original physical cost of the existing asset. And so it was a major lift. We touched everything on the property, but we retained the essence of the Motor Lodge experience that we inherited. Again, not wanting to fight the building, we celebrated the building, but we then layered in aspects that made it more of an experience that we believed it represented and that we thought that the consumer would resonate with. And so that included adding a suite product, which was 3 tiny houses. The tiny house craze is strong. You've got comps like, Auto Camp and Under Canvas, and I can't remember the other tiny house.
Did you look at doing that? Adding some Auto Camp style campers or some tents?
We did. We actually we talked briefly with Auto Camp about it, but it was just too small for them. So we ended up just building our own. We have 3 tiny houses, which are the suites, and then we built 2 additional tiny houses, which ended up being this Nordic spa component that we wanted to create. So this is 2 private saunas rented by the hour. They have private courtyards with an outdoor fire pit, cold plunge, hot tub, and you find yourself to a Nordic spa circuit where you kind of go through this thermal experience from hot to cold, with resting time, in between around the fire pit. Do
you have a cold plunge?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
What's the temperature?
So the cold plunge is actually our unheated pool. So in the winter, it's very, very cold. And in the summer, it stays cold. And then we also have one of those bucket showers, like the high volume overhead pull showers. So that's kept at very, very cold temperatures. So between the cold plunge and the cold shower, and then the hot tub and the sauna, we actually conceived of that with the idea that if you're passing through Flagstaff and headed to the Grand Canyon, you're focused on being in the outdoors. We also recognize that Flagstaff is a grittier, more authentic mountain town, and not known for its hospitality experiences. But what's right next door, of course, is Sedona, which is very, very well known for high-end luxury hospitality experiences and spas. And so it was actually this kind of idea to thumb our nose a little bit at Sedona and say, look, we're not you. We're never going to be you. And we know that people who are coming through Flagstaff want something different than Sedona. We did not try and replicate what was on offer there. And so the idea of this Nordic spa was to really be outdoors, indoor, outdoor, and have it be kind of rustic and fun and casual and convivial, and to have a private sauna that fits you and your 5 friends, and you come out of the Grand Canyon, or you come down from a day of skiing at Snowbowl. It's just this fun kind of unique way to still find yourself in the outdoors, but have it kind of in a convenient and high touch hospitality experience nonetheless.
And are you figuring out who your guest is when you're underwriting the deal from the start, or is that evolving when you bring in a design team and you start going through what you want it to be? And how do you even figure out what you want it to be? Like you talked about Sedona. How did you even know that was going to be the strategy?
It kind of it's emergent a little bit. I think in some ways, we understand enough of the demographic profile of who is already coming there, and then we're taking some risks to say we want to tell you who we want to self-select in new visitors to come and visit us that in some cases may not have found the opportunity to even stay in Flagstaff. So, for example, with Snowbowl, that's the nearest ski resort to Phoenix, Arizona, which now has about 5 million people in the metro area. That's a 2-hour drive. And people were typically doing day trips or staying in some of the hotels in Flagstaff. But if we just get a small percentage of people who now see us as an opportunity, as a great place to stay to support, their ski trip that weekend. I mean, it doesn't take much to fill up 120 rooms when the ski hill's getting, I don't know how many thousand visitors a day on a weekend. And we really wanted to, provide a different experience, something that didn't exist in market. So on the one hand, it was a risk. On the other hand, it felt like low-hanging fruit. And then as we layered in kind of the design concept, things like the tiny houses emerged as a way to have a suite product, like a higher cost, higher touch experience. And then the Nordic spa came thereafter, which was to say, this is kind of a marketing opportunity to have something that's really easy to understand, unique, not necessarily common experience that you can find in other places, but that makes a lot of sense for this particular hotel in this particular location. And that's a lot of what we do. The joy, of course, of doing a different concept or a different design experience in every hotel allows us to lean into the various aspects of what we believe should be on offer and what that folks want to experience. And it also makes it more difficult and costly and time consuming and all the things that, we have to kind of slightly reinvent the wheel every time. But I think in the long run, it's where we have the greatest pathway towards true value creation, and these kind of unique bespoke experiences resonate.
And on a deal like this, who's designing it for you? Do you have an in-house team? Are you working with outside designers?
We don't have any in-house team, and I always work. I mean, my job, one of my favorite aspects of my job, and you and I have talked about this, is kind of understanding the design landscape, at the top of the design pinnacle, it's a very small ecosystem, right? There's a lot of designers, a lot of great designers, but it's pretty rarefied air near the top. And having those relationships established, maintaining those relationships over time, and then being able to approach a high quality, high rate design team for a given opportunity is a significant portion of what I do day to day, and significant contributor to the value that we're able to create. And so, in this particular case, this was a designer that had 7 years at Avroco and then 2 years at Soho, and had started her own firm. And so it was perfect timing. This was her first hotel project on her own, and one where I knew she was going to pour her heart and soul into it. And she also was from the mountains. She grew up in Park City, so she understood what it meant to be in a mountain town. So it was just kind of a great confluence of factors that led us to working with her. And she absolutely knocked it out of the park, and was the right moment in time for us to work together on this particular opportunity. And
I think I'm getting it, because we've talked about this, right? And there's so many good designers, but those good designers have gotten so expensive. And I was wondering, on a small project like this, how you justify that expense, how you work it into the overall budget. So is that something that you've done before, found an emerging designer and maybe taken a little bit of a risk, but overall it works, and the design's going to be great? You might have to work a little harder. You might have some challenges along the way, but at the end of the day, that's what you have to do to get it done. Is that the thought process?
especially on these smaller deals that could not support, the exorbitant design fees that the ultra top tier now command. I'd say that she's obviously going to be moving into that trajectory. I mean, that's obviously her goal, but again, it was a moment in time where it was a mutual opportunity to do something great, for it to be scrappy, to be bootstrappy, and all of the things that it needed to be, but to be a very high quality, high level design expression. That was in her DNA through the experience that she'd had with these very reputable and high quality firms that she'd been with previously. So I think that was a moment in time, and we've done that elsewhere at Hotel Carmel, for example, which is a 30-room hotel in Carmel. We worked with another emerging designer that had just broken off at that time, and started his own firm, and so it was the same kind of circumstance. But those are I find it a struggle to keep tabs on who's moving, when they're moving, having known them at a previous design firm and then having them go out on their own. It's tough, and I always admire folks that are able to find that inflection point and leverage that kind of hungry moment in time that is launching careers. So it's not always attainable, but in this case, it worked out well for us, and it's just something that you kind of get lucky with.
So on these new hotels that you're doing, you have to prioritize certain things because of budget. What are you prioritizing now going forward? And what are those decisions that you're making to make the project better? And maybe you're going to sacrifice something else. What are some of those items?
Limiting construction as much as possible is essential, right? So we really practice the mantra of, like, again, don't fight the building. What does that mean when you're actually getting into the nuts and bolts of construction? That means some cases, or mostly all cases, never move a wall, right? You all want bigger bathrooms, but we just can't move walls. And so we live with what we have. We all want new bathroom tile, but in some cases the tile's good enough and we can just regrout. There's these major, cost hurdles that sometimes seem essential, but you have to, I think, squint your eyes and realize that the thing you hated most, or the thing that was most difficult about leaving alone, can be less of an eyesore once everything else is done. And you have to trust that your audience, your guest, will either understand and appreciate the fact that you left it alone, or other aspects of the project that will be nice enough or beautiful enough that it allows the tapestry to elicit an experience that is acceptable and enjoyable and beautiful in a way that, again, the constraints, a lot of these constraints too, we talk about being benevolent constraints, benevolent obstacles. And if you look at them that way, then it makes it a little bit easier to move past these things that you think are just abhorrent and unacceptable. I will say, I do admire, I just went and checked out the new Pally House in West Hollywood. And I do admire the work that Avi Brosh does. I believe he does that as well as anyone I've seen. And in the last few projects of his that I've toured, he has left alone the bathroom tile, and he's added other design elements within the bathroom that help subsume the tile itself. At the Pally House West Hollywood, he actually did something I've never seen before, which I plan to appropriate when it's the right time to do so. But he put up actually a residential curtain on the shower glass door that was kind of tied back with a bow, and that could actually be slid across. It was on a traditional curtain track, and what that did was just take your eye to the curtain and this kind of beautiful gathered curtain, and obscured, the first look that you have in the bathroom at this kind of older bathroom tile, and it just made it kind of fade into the background. And then he also put in some really interesting kind of traditional Richwood looking kind of beadboard around the whole bathroom wall itself. And so those two elements, which are relatively low cost, I mean, certainly a fraction of the cost of redoing the bathroom tile, made it so that the overall bathroom experience was totally acceptable and beautiful. And I thought that was a very clever use of design dollars, as opposed to what I would do, and many of us would do, is look at the bathroom tile and say, we can't live with this, we got to rip it out. And that could be $10,000-$15,000 a room right now, maybe more. I mean, it's just ridiculously how expensive that could be.
It is so ridiculous how costs are right now, and it's these little ideas that really bring to mind some of these geniuses in the boutique and lifestyle hospitality space. Talking Barry Sternlicht, Avi Brosh that you mentioned, Andre Balash, Schrager. What separates these folks, the geniuses, from those that are very good? Well, other than shower curtains.
If I knew that, you'd put my name with that list of people.
But you can identify it. So what are you seeing in these hotels that they're getting right?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's just there's certain people that have this tremendous capacity for right brain, left brain expression, right? And I think Barry Sternlicht would be a great example of a right brain, left brain guy who has it all. He has design sense, he has a business sense, and he's got the aggressive nature within him to action on a tremendous scale and just really remarkable kind of market leading ideas. And so I just think it boils down to these special folks that have the ability to tune into the business imperatives and the design imperatives that come together in a concoction that is a force multiplier for value creation of these deals. I also think that there's a lot of smart things that they do, right? I mean, the Avi Brosh example, of course, saved a lot of money. I remember going to the Public Hotel in Chicago. I think that was the first public hotel, which is no longer. But I went into the rooms there, and the common areas to begin with are so beautiful. It was such a beautiful kind of Schrager-esque job, and the restaurant, everything about it was just such a wow. And it was so overwhelmingly beautiful that by the time you got to your room, the residual effect of that first impression allowed allowed you to forgive the limited scope of work that they did in the guest rooms. And he basically painted the whole room white. He left everything alone. Had very, very limited for FF&E, and like these tiny little pictures that were just bizarrely small, but something about the way that they were allowed to breathe on the walls kind of made them appear bigger and more impactful than they were. And it was just these tiny little touches that made the rooms made you feel like these rooms are just fine. Like, I feel fine in this place. I feel good in this place. It's elegant. It's clean. It's simple. But it was, a stark comparison to the common areas and the overwhelming kind of impressive nature of the arrival experience. And so I think, understanding where to be restrained, where to overwhelm is a really, interesting and difficult to put your finger on, value creation technique that these titans of the business were able to understand and lean into.
So are you prioritizing in a lot of your properties the public spaces over certain guest room decisions because in the guest room the costs just multiply out? Or do you not necessarily think that way?
No, absolutely. I think it depends on the rates that are achievable. But for example, at High Country Motor Lodge, we had to be very, very, very restrained in the guest rooms, and we leaned much more into the common areas. And it allowed us to be more efficient with the spend. We have like fiberglass shower pans, and simple subway tile, and that was as much as we could do in the bathrooms. And then we applied some, interesting beadboard and other elements in the guest rooms. Again, really simple, straightforward, but paint and some tactile layering went a long way there. And we just cleaned it up and kind of took the opinion that this is a room that needs to function well. It can be very simple. It can be restrained, but that most people want to spend a lot of their time either in the Nordic spa or the hot tub or in the common areas. And we've got a beautifully oversized lobby that has lots of different nooks and crannies and different places to spend a lot of your time. And the room itself can be used for sleeping and showering. And the rest of the time, you kind of want to be out and about with people. And I think especially during the post-pandemic era that we're in, people want to be around other people as much as possible. As long as they feel comfortable in doing so. And we're seeing that project at least benefit from that desire at this time.
So now, are you designing your hotels going forward in a more community-oriented way in the public areas, in the outside areas, to leverage that trend that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think I think when we started moving into the boutique space, we were very F&B averse, and I think that we're still very cautious about trying to be too much, to be too heavily focused on F&B in terms of understanding the risks associated with food wastage and food costs, but also labor costs and the things that go into very high end food and beverage offerings. And so we keep very close eye on keeping a very simple and efficient offering on the actual food and beverage side, but making sure that those things are really, really well done. Kind of doing less, but doing them better is a mantra of ours. And then focusing on the spaces to compel and energize folks to linger and spend time and feel comfortable and confident that it's just that you don't have to be eating and drinking the whole time in these spaces. We want them to be places for the in between moments, and I think that's where the design becomes super valuable. And I think that's the balance that we try and find, because we understand how difficult food and beverage is, and we do everything in house. We do it all ourselves. We haven't done any partnerships. Someday we will, if it's the right opportunity, of course. But at this stage, um, that's one of our own internal benevolent constraints that we stay focused on.
John, I think that's a contrarian view, because everything I tend to hear and see is the focus and the emphasis and the effort that people put into these elaborate F&B outlets in their hotels, whether it's a bar or a club or a restaurant. So what are you doing to avoid that? How are you creating these moments? The podcast is called Master of Moments. How are you creating these moments without such a heavy emphasis on the F&B component in a lifestyle hotel?
Well, it's a risk, and look, it's. I find myself wanting to be competitive and looking at folks who are doing great food and beverage experiences and wanting to be that. And I love that for myself. I'm drawn to that, as others are. Um, and it's hard, right? It's hard to view it as a benevolent constraint, and it's hard to say, this is what we're good at. We're going to deliver what we're good at, and we're going to stay in our lane. And in doing so, as long as we can deliver very high quality experience within our lane, then we believe that it's an acceptable experience, that's going to be additive and accretive, in totality for the project itself. But it is hard to do that. I will say, for example, in Flagstaff, we developed a menu around the idea that every component of the food and beverage experience should be trainable in a very short period of time and have the least moving parts possible. And that goes for food and the beverage. I mean, right now, you and I could get trained up on the beverage program, and we could be bartenders there this evening. And we could do a great job because we have tapped cocktails. We have specialty cocktails that have, 3 ingredients or less. We have a very limited selection of specialty cocktails that totally resonate with the experience. We've got a bunch of Boilermakers, which are obviously just a shot in the beer, but they're conceived of in a way that supports the overall experience and really makes a lot of sense. And so that's really our goal when we layer in the food and beverage, to make it resonate and feel, not feel restrained when you experience it, but be thoughtful about what we put in so the throughputs are minimized as much as possible.
So I'm really interested in your secret sauce, because this to me is a very big differentiator from a lot of folks. And I'm curious if there's more. I'm wondering, is there a variable or something that you consider when you're analyzing a new investment that would surprise some of the listeners?
I don't necessarily think so. I think your comment earlier in this discussion with regards to the simplicity of real estate, right? Like, location is the most important thing. We all know that. So if you take location as kind of a key pillar of our litmus test, that is where we start and stop our opportunities, and then we just really focus on remaining as simple as possible through the process. And simplicity is very, very difficult to do. We spend a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out how we can deliver on the simplest experience possible. But keeping that focus in mind is what really leads us to, I think, these outcomes that are valuable, that are creative, that are sustainable. And because we have such a long-term investment horizon, it has to be sustainable. These are not, brand endeavors for the sake of building a brand. These are endeavors for the sake of long-term value creation, because we have the staying power to stick with these deals for the long term. Our portfolio is intended to be owned and operated in perpetuity, and that's a little bit different.
What does that mean? Because most operators are underwriting to a 5 to 7 year hold period. So how is your strategy so different, and why is that your approach?
Principally, it's to do with our capital profile. So we invest all of our own money in our own deals. We have a limited um, pool of other private investors that invest alongside us. And our horizon is indefinite. We can look at a longer term return profile. Obviously, it needs to be a very good return profile. It needs to be market rate, but we can find our way to those kind of long term IRRs, if you will. Even though we don't really use that as a metric because we're not selling. You don't need IRR if you don't have an end date in mind. But our cash on cash return profile, typically starts slower, but it can ramp up pretty dramatically later in these projects. And then, our attention to detail and our proprietary ownership preferences allow us to continue to enhance the projects as we go. And that, I think, speaks to our geographic focus. If we can be there a lot, we can see the opportunities to improve or fix aspects of the project that need to be fixed preemptively, or in a way that continues to allow the property or the experience of the property to evolve. So there's not a fixed moment in time where these projects are done. We've got our initial, push to get it to what it needs to be with the new brand or the new concept, but then we're constantly servicing the experience. We're constantly layering on new programming opportunities. We're constantly looking at the competitive landscape and saying, who are we now? We know who we are, but how do we become more of who we are in the marketplace, and how do we maintain our presence? The Scott Resort, for example, is now, I guess, going on 5-6 years, and the market has become even more competitive, and it's even more noisy and more difficult to be a prominent experience in Scottsdale. And we're layering on more and more interesting programming. We're enhancing the offering that we have. We know who we are, and we have a great team who really understands what we offer. And then we let them, let them tell us what we should do more of. We have programming there like 5 nights a week now. We started the project with only 2. Now it's not, crazy spend programming, but it's programming that resonates with the locals, and the locals are incredible word of mouth referrals for business. They're also people that make the space feel good. And so keeping it energized, keeping it fresh. We've got a really interesting bar cart series where we do specialized meals twice a month. We've got a monthly rum. It's called the Rum Society, where we have rum makers come in and do a specialized meal. So just allows our culinary team to shine and have kind of bespoke, interesting one-off meals, and then it allows them to keep focused on what we do really well, which is our standard menu. So it's by keeping ourselves and our team energized and excited about the experience of the property, it leads us to the ability to communicate that to our guests, and that they keep interested and energized about the experiences that are on offer.
I'm starting to see the magic now, because I think one thing that so many people get wrong is they invest the majority of their capital in the physical, whether it's landscaping, the building, the guest room, the public areas, adding a new restaurant, but then they don't support that manager, or they don't manage it right. They don't invest in the programming. Is being vertically integrated your most sought after competitive advantage, do you think? Could you do this if you weren't managing your own hotels?
And that it's our biggest advantage and our biggest liability, because it's such a heavy lift. It is so much work, and it takes so much time and effort. Luckily, it's what we love to do, right? Wouldn't be able to do this if you didn't love it and you weren't surrounded by a group of people that love doing it. Because at the end of the day, managing hotels is hard, and I take my hat off to professional managers, and these folks are really in it, right? It's a passion, it's a craft, it's not just a business, it transcends business into a way of being and a way of seeing the world. So um, the vertical integration allows us to be really nimble and change. And I hate the word. We don't necessarily pivot, but we iterate, and we can just do things and experiment with things very quickly and have immediate feedback that we can then talk about and debate. And the one other thing I would say, in addition to kind of the vertical integration, um, from a property management perspective, is the commitment that we make as a client to our designers. And so I think if I were a designer, I would be really frustrated to do a project, create this beautiful thing, take photos of this moment in time when it had just been completed and it looks exactly like the design team had intended, and then to come back 2 or 3 or 5 years later and see it fall apart, right? And our commitment to the design team is that we will work very, very hard to create these design pillars and concepts that can be brought to life physically and then actually grow beyond their initial expectation through the attention to detail and consistent enrichment that our operational team can layer in. And so that is a point of difference, not only to how these properties live and grow in the marketplace, but a point of difference to our commitment to the design team, that they know when they work with us that we will really truly fight to keep their vision alive and to delight them as they return to the property to see how much more it could grow into than they had previously even thought of. For example, when the project was being scripted in its infancy.
How do you and your operating team know how to continue the vision in the right way, or to mold the vision to what the right way is? Are you there 5 nights a week picking the entertainment, or are you kind of setting the guardrails and your team knows what that should look like? And then is there some communication with the designers? Like, hey, just checking to see if this is still cool. How does that work?
All of the above. Yeah, absolutely. So with the design, with these conceptual design teams that we work with, we do establish the brand narrative, like the design concept narrative. And then actually, we internally take that narrative and we transform it into an operational narrative. And that's really my job. I mean, I'm the translator, because I go through that, I create the design concept and I empower the design team to bring that to life. And then I swing back around to then retranslate that design concept into a tangible, actionable brand guide, experiential guide document that is then further disseminated through our HR team. And so my job is to make sure that when we hand off this project and that we ask our team to bring it to life, that they understand the essence of the project, they understand the guardrails, the pillars, and they can reference this visual and written document in a way that allows them to iterate but to do so in a way that nests within the concept. And so that there is communication. Obviously, it's a communication problem, right? We need to communicate this brand and this vision in a way that can be easily understood.
But you actually have a brand document that you can give to your team. If people turn over, you can give it to them, and that's something you hold them to and you go back to.
100%. And then at the front end of these projects, as we're translating this concept, there's a lot of direct driving that I'm doing. There's a lot of creative collision, as we translate it from a physical space to a living space. And in the first year or so of the project, we're constantly talking about, what does this mean? How are these ideas nesting within this concept? Does this feel true and right? And then there's this transitional period where the GMs, who I'm really debating this with, can, take ownership of the concept, and then they're able to start making their own independent decisions. And I'm in a point now with the Scott where this creative team that we have are coming up with these ideas. I didn't come up with the bar cart series. I didn't come up with some of these other programming elements. They're just doing it, and they're informing me and saying, look, this is what we did. This is how it makes sense. This is why it's on brand. This is how the concept is further supported. And I'm just coming back and delighted and saying, like, this is awesome, guys. Like, music makes sense. Food nights make sense. These different things you're doing, these brunches that you're doing make sense. And it allows them to again, be empowered and self-selecting, right? So these GMs are hungry for that.
That is awesome. I love it. But you said creative team, but I think it's really your GM, your food and beverage team. Like, you don't have some separate creative operation team that's also at the hotel in addition to the people running the hotel. It's the same team, right?
Right. It's the same team. Yeah. So it's the operational team, but they're creative. They're empowered to be a creative partner in this endeavor.
So coming out of COVID, everyone is talking about these major trends, these big things that are changing, keyless entry, all this kind of stuff. What are the big trends and things that you're thinking about over the next 5 years, if any?
Good quality service and timelessness is always on trend. Like, I think you can overcomplicate it. I think it's easy to get mired in these intricacies and try and pull on threads and come up with a new trend and do this and do that. But I think at its core, the honesty of an experience is the thing that is the most important to keep sight of. And what are the tools that you can use to leverage that? And what I mean by that is, we just started doing self-check-in at High Country Motor Lodge. We have 4 self-check-in kiosks, and we have 1 front desk person who is called a guide. That person is just there to talk with you about the experiences that are available to you on property. They're not there to talk to you about how was your drive, what are you doing, and all the time filler that's required for the front desk agent to just fill the awkward spaces between handing over the credit card and checking you in. Like, that's not a value add hospitality experience. That's just an awkward, valueless transactional moment. And so instead, you're checking yourself in, you're making your own key card, and there's a person who's there to talk to you about the Nordic Spa and to invite you to get into the headspace of this experience and talk with you about the general store, which is our food and beverage concept that has an actual general store where you order at the counter and then the food comes out, which is indicated to you using your cell phone and other technological support infrastructure. But at the end of the day, it's like, how do you quickly order and find your seat and then have the food be brought out to you? And all we ask you for is your phone number so we can get a text message, and you can either pick up the food or you can tell us where you're at. And so, it's how do we layer on technology so it's additive and it's supportive of the idea of hospitality in its true essence, of being convenient, being convivial, being seen, right, and being made feel special. And so we're actually, it's fun to take these little test cases and then see if they work and then roll them out. So we're actually designing right now a new concept for a hotel in Laguna. It's called Inn at Laguna Beach. And we are changing the name, relaunching the brand, and it's going to be a relatively high-rated experience, and we're going to do a self-check-in kiosk there as well. So, $600-$700 night hotel with a self-check-in kiosk. We might be the first at this high end of the market to do so, and pretty confident.
Well, you're onto
now.
something, because people aren't checking into a hotel to talk about the drive-in or the flight in. They're there to talk about the experiences. And health and wellness today seems to be one of the top. Outdoors and nature seems to be up there. Is that something that you are spending a lot of time thinking about as part of your experience package?
Hmm. Yeah, it's all germane to the location. Absolutely. So wherever we can, we're just trying to be true to the experience. At the Inn at Laguna Beach, we don't have room for a spa. We of course can bring spa experiences into your room. Those are hit or miss. It really depends on who your third party spa partner is. But instead, partnering with ways to get folks into the ocean, stand up paddling and otherwise. Again, these are things that are enjoyable and they are accessible, but they're not much if you don't know about them. And so if you have the opportunity while you're checking in to self check in, to select, your room and such, but then to be in a conversation with a guide who can talk to you and learn more about what your interests might be, and then direct you in a way that can be a support of what you really want out of your stay. That's really where we want to focus our training. That's where we want our team to be uh, enhancing your stay. Really be curious about what you want and having the time and space for us to try and unearth that. And then, of course, recording that using content management systems to allow us to record your preferences so that, you might stay with us in Laguna one time, but we know who you are when you get to Carmel. And we say, we saw that you went stand up paddling in Carmel. We don't have that here in Carmel, but we have sea kayak tours. And maybe that's something that's going to be, an interesting, you know, delightful prompt for that guest who's decided to come up to us in Carmel.
Is that something that you can actually do? Because that's very hard, but it's amazing when it's done right.
We're working on it. That's a current focus, and so that is definitely not necessarily in our infrastructure right now, but it's one of the technological leverages that we're unearthing at the moment. And it's just how do we layer on the institutional ethos that you see at a very high quality experience like at a Ritz Carlton or a Four Seasons, and bring that to a bespoke kind of small, quaint inn by the sea. And it's all about punching above our weight, so to speak, and doing it thoughtfully and strategically, and having a sense of entrepreneurship as part of our DNA. I think that's helpful.
I love it. It comes through. You are a master of moments. So I have a question that I want to close on with all the guests of the podcast. And it's something that I am often asked. And that is, what is your favorite hotel?
Oh, that's a good one. So I don't think I have a favorite, but I will say I had a favorite experience this last July. We went to Point Reyes for a wedding, and we stayed at Monca's Inverness Lodge. And I'm not sure if you've stayed there. It actually just sold to a consortium led by Ken Folk, but we stayed there prior to that. And the thing about that experience was it connected so deeply with the place that we were in. It was a tiny little hotel room in an old boat shed above an old boat building shop on Inverness Bay, and it was like we walked back in time. And that was beautiful by itself. But then they layered on these amazing, simple, but thoughtful hospitality elements. Most notably was the morning breakfast that arrived, bundled in this beautiful wrapping of tinfoil nested within this like linen tablecloth that was rolled and put inside this kind of cast iron basin that you kind of, opened and smells, and this kind of delightful experience, and with a little card that talked about where it came from and why today was the day that we got to have, waffles with the special honey syrup and this, that, and the other, that were all so beautifully local in nature. And I think that's really hard to do, to go to a place and experience the place in such a beautifully authentic way is what it is that we all want to do when we're traveling. And it's the most difficult promise to deliver on. And I think that one was very, very inspiring. So I would say at this stage, Monkas Inverness Lodge is a very, very special experience.
It's a vibe. I'm in. I want to go. And I think it's exciting that Ken Folk bought it. There's a lot of designers getting into the hospitality space. I wonder if their hotel friends have told them how truly complicated it is. But if it results in more experiences like you just described, let's do it.
I'm all for it.
We'll go back them.
Absolutely.
This was amazing. I thank you so much for your time and what you shared. It was really just a fabulous conversation, and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be part of this, and I'm so excited to see where it leads.
Hey everyone, it's Jake here. Thanks again for joining me on this conversation. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at @JWurzak. I'll see you in the next episode.
Jake Wurzak is the founder and CEO of Dove Hill Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Jake and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Dove Hill Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not reflect or represent real estate, financial, or investment advice.